been waiting and waiting for this to introduce our speaker. I've been so very excited about it. Our speaker is Stephanie Jaeger. She is a lead consultant. Her topic is finding your niche no matter what life throws at you. And she has certainly reinvented herself multiple times, as you will see. She is zooming in from Kenya. And it's about 6:30 there, going on to 7 p.m. So we're very appreciative. She has over 20 years project management experience. Most of these are working in senior management. In addition, she has 10 years experience setting up project management processes and developing templates in different companies. She specializes in aligning project management processes to the corporate strategy and mentoring the team during implementation. Her experience is in the IT and healthcare sectors, both in private enterprises and the NGO, non-government organization sectors. She focuses on the human factor in project management, program management, change management, PMO development, process management, and mentorship. She is the ideal partner to help you align yourself to the changing needs of your industry. She is also a certified strength deployment inventory facilitator, a psychometric testing for improvement of teamwork outcomes and prevention of team conflicts. We need to send her all over the world. Let's try Russia first, okay? She is an experienced volunteer for Project Management Institute, having served on the PMI Kenya chapter board, the Region 16, and in multiple other roles. Currently, she is serving as the VP of Volunteers for PMI Kenya chapter. She is a registered nurse. She has a BBA healthcare management degree. She is PMP certified, ACE certified, certified SDI facilitator. She is also a graduate of the PMI Leadership Institute masterclass and a regular content provider on the projectmanagement.com website. She is a German citizen with 29 years multicultural and multilingual experience in East Africa. We are so honored to have her in our presence. Please give a warm welcome to Stephanie Jaeger.
Thanks so much. That was an amazing introduction.
You are an amazing person, obviously.
Thank you so much. And I've been listening in for quite a while, and interestingly, some of the things you said tie right in with what I'm going to talk about.
Excellent.
So let me try and share.
And by the way, Stephanie has asked that you hold your questions till the end, and she'll be happy to answer them at that point. And Stephanie, take the full hour, no matter what. If we go over beyond the hour long, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Just stop me when I go way too far. Okay, so today we talk about finding your niche, and I think we all have experienced that life can throw things at you that you did not expect, and you find yourself in corners that you never thought you would find yourself in, like myself in the IT world. Let's start with a disclaimer. Of course, the views and opinions are my own. Oh my gosh, I didn't do the change there. The PowerPoint slides are protected and they're under the copyright laws, not of AT&T, sorry. Then the photos I've used there are definitely only from free stock photos, or they're my own possession. So there is no infringements on any copyrights. Let's start with a very quick introduction of who I am, but I will be talking a lot more about my journey as we go along. As already mentioned, I'm a nurse, and that is my first profession, and that has really, I think, defined of how I do a lot of my other work. Then I'm also a project manager. I've managed construction projects, I've managed IT projects, I've managed process development projects, and strategy projects. So there is a lot of things I've done. And I am a PMI volunteer, which joining PMI was probably the best thing I ever did when I had to change my career. And I've had some amazing experiences. And then, of course, now I'm a consultant and trainer, mentor, and an SDI assessor. A quick agenda. First, we'll talk a little bit about my own journey. I'll talk about my early years, a quick fly through. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with stories of my life. Then we'll talk about my career journey, where I turned from a bush nurse into a project manager and consultant in currently the IT world. And then I'll give you a bit more overview of finding your niche in your different stages of life, how to build your brand, and then possibilities for later stages in life. Good, so let's start with an introduction to the topic. My story is actually the story of an accidental project manager. I tried to fight it and I tried for 6 months, and then my boss threatened to sack me. And then I finally agreed to become a project manager. And what I learned there immediately was that you don't need to be a subject matter expert to successfully manage projects. Because that time I was pushed into IT infrastructure projects, and I wouldn't have known a telephone cable from a computer cable. And here I was doing infrastructure projects in hotels and other offices and all kinds of places. But the one thing that is a constant, you have to keep learning. And I heard Kathy talking about that as well. So let's look at my early years. It started out very innocently. I had a normal life. Of course, I went to school, did the usual things young people do, whether it's riding horses or whether it's playing dramas in your church or other things. And suddenly, with 15 and a half, there was the first big cut in my life that changed everything. No, that's not my baby. This is my godchild. I never forget the day when my parents sat us down. There was 4 of us. The oldest was 17 and a half. And the rest of us followed pretty closely. And they told us that we're having another sibling on the way. Of course, our first reaction as typical teenagers was, really, don't they have anything better to do? And then finally we found our peace with it. And of course, once she was born, we all loved her to bits. But what happened there is that my mom basically pushed me into becoming the godmother. I didn't think I was ready. I was 15 and a half when Anna was born. But suddenly here I was having adult responsibilities for a baby. And that went as far as when I would go babysitting, I'd have a baby with me. When I'd go with my girlfriends to the local lake to have a day out swimming, I would have a baby with me. So I learned very quickly to take up a lot of responsibilities. And that was the first time I had really mega changes to do in my life. But we had good fun. And even so it was traumatic in the beginning, we found our way around, and I think I learned a lot. So let's look at my professional journey. When I finished high school, I took a long time to figure out what I wanted to do, because I knew I wasn't good enough to become a doctor. You had to be a straight A student for that, and I definitely was not a straight A student. And then after a while, I figured out I should be a nurse. And I was laughing when Kathy was saying earlier that you have to write a lot of applications, because for me to find a nursing school that took me on, I wrote, I think, to 20 nursing schools. And they all told me, apply to the nursing school in your home county. Well, my home county didn't have a nursing school. And then I was finally taken on by a Christian nursing school. So here you see me somewhere in the background on the last row, the one on the left. And we had just finished our pre-training, and we're now about to go and see patients for the first time the next day. And as I did my nurse's training, I really fell in love with the profession. And I was a nurse afterwards for quite a while. But I also felt like I had a call to go into the mission field. So I started preparing systematically to come to Kenya. That's how I ended up in Kenya, with the missionaries working in the bush. And of course, before I went, we had lots of fun as nurses. This was not official duties. Yeah, we were just having fun, making fun of other people and providing first aid during a football game. And then suddenly my world changed. I had gone to America to mission training, and we had been prepared pretty well, but nothing really prepares you to moving into another country. I'm sure Busra can confirm how it was moving to America. You think you know everything about the country, and then actually showing up there, you realize it's totally different. And now you can imagine I came from Germany and ended up in the bush. We didn't even have telephone at that area when I first went there. And letters home would take, I think, 4 weeks or something like that. And suddenly I'm doing work that is totally different from what I was doing before. But I had fun and had a very good time there. Only I ended up having too many arguments with the missionaries. And that was now a big change again, because suddenly what I thought was going to be my life, being a nurse in the bush with the missionaries, came to an abrupt end, because we had to agree to change to split up, and me leaving working with those missionaries. And yeah, we did have a lot of fun up there. And working in these cultures, working in a nomadic culture, was definitely a learning process. I learned a lot. I learned to love the people. And I think it also influenced my later choices in life. And then I joined an HMO. At that time, HMOs were still allowed in Kenya. And so I ended up first being a clinical nurse, and then later I was sent to Lokichogyo, which is in the north of Kenya. It used to be the base camp for all UN operations in South Sudan. And I was running the clinic for the UN employees. And then some other major things happened in my life. And I had a very rough divorce. And that ended up also with me not getting a work permit again in Kenya. So Busra, I know all about getting sponsors and work permits and work visas. And I ended up in Tanzania. This picture here, you see me in my AAR uniform. On the left is the clinic manager. She was also a nurse. And in the middle was one of the sales agents for the HMO. And I spent a couple of months there doing something I'd never done before. Me with no IT training in anything, I was now training the nurses there how to use the IT systems, the software that we had. And I was also training them in customer care. And then I worked with a couple of other health organizations. Here you see us at the Camel Derby. Don't worry, we were not doing the medical care for the camels, but we were taking care of the riders, because African camels are a bit wilder than the ones you have in the Arab countries. So the Camel Derby is very adventurous, and people falling off, or a camel lying down and simply not moving anymore in the middle of the race is quite common. So we were providing the first aid there and had lots of fun. During that time, around that time, my life was also defined with sports. I was a marathon runner, and I was in a group of runners. Here we were in an annual relay that was happening in the Great Rift Valley, amazing running country, but also very hot and dusty. And running was basically what I defined myself with. And suddenly that came to a big stop. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and suddenly couldn't run anymore. All my joints were swollen, and for 6 months I was in constant pain. Then I had to learn to live with that again. And it took me quite a while, but within a year I was back to at least running half marathons, but with a different approach. I had learned about the Galloway method, and that is basically running in intervals. You have a little timer and you run, walk, run, walk. That way your joints are not affected as much as running continuously. Of course, you can imagine Kenya is an amazing running country. It's quite normal that when you're doing your training runs in certain parts of town that you meet people like Paul Tergat and Katrin de Reber doing their training runs. And here you are just feeling like you're running along in snail space. And that also was something that really affected me, not just for my identity outside of work, but of course, living with an autoimmune disease, and which in my case is rheumatoid arthritis, affects also your mobility and also your future planning. So that was something that first terrified me, but now I'm quite happy with what I'm doing and how I changed things around. Good, let's look at the professional side of things. Meanwhile, I had worked in other medical organizations. I'll show you the more detailed timeline in a little bit. And then I didn't find a job. I couldn't find a job in any medical organization anymore. And I ended up in an IT company that was providing the link between the health insurers and the healthcare providers. Because those days, our internet wasn't that well developed yet. And then that company had to close down because of some political intrigues. And one of the shareholders of the company told me, "See, you come and join my company." And I'm like, sure, but what will I do in an IT company? Because he now had a straightforward company. That was probably the first IT company in Kenya. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll find a job for you. You know your customer care." And that's how I ended up in the IT world. And these are the same people who later forced me into project management. So here, when I had finally accepted project management, I found myself in a 5-star hotel, because that construction site is actually the Nairobi Kempinski Hotel. And sometimes looking a bit stupid in a suit on a construction site, but because you had to balance between client meetings and construction site visits and so on, you just had to adapt. And when I was forced into that position, I insisted that at least they give me some training. And the first training I did was MS Project, so the use of that software. And that's how I learned that the same training organization was also providing PMP training for project management professional. And at that time, the reason I chose PMP training over Prince 2, which is very common in former Commonwealth countries, was actually because PMP training was cheaper. But it brought me into the then very brand new Kenya chapter of PMI. And when I sat in the training the first day, and the guy was doing a general introduction to project management, and that you plan and you look at goals, you look at risks, and then you come up with your plans. And I'm thinking, that sounds familiar. I've done that. Turns out nursing care planning is basically project planning. So for me, that was another way I could embrace a totally new profession that I hadn't wanted in the beginning. And from there, I never looked back and moved forward in project management. I found myself suddenly taking up roles I'd never taken up before. Like here, we were having an HP event because the company I was working for were HP Gold partners at the time. And I ended up emceeing an event where they were discussing technical things I had no clue about. But that doesn't matter. You can learn. And I didn't have to give the technical talk. I was just being the MC. Or I was having meetings with highly technical people. Of course, the two gentlemen were my technical people. So I only had to look at their faces to see whether whatever these two ladies were telling us made sense. And I managed to handle a lot of situations that I never thought I would have to deal with. And of course, when I joined PMI, I also entered the world of speaking and writing. Again, if you go back to my teenage years, I was an extremely shy teenager. And because I was so unsure of myself, I actually didn't even dare have my own opinion. And here I was teaching others, giving talks, speaking to other people. And sometimes I have to laugh at myself. But all these things are possible. And I always say, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And all these stepping stones of my life and my career have made me the person that I am today. And I'm proud of who I am today. And Kathy, actually, I liked your idea of the comprehensive list of all the jobs that you have ever had and the achievements, because actually what has helped me in my life many times is an achievement box. It's just an old biscuit tin where I have loose papers, and on each paper I've written down an achievement. And when I'm really feeling down and under, and I'm feeling like I can't do any of this, I start pulling out papers from that box at random and looking at what I have achieved. And these are achievements from my private life, or that achievements from the trainings I've done that I'm proud of, or professional achievements. And I tell you what, when you start reading these achievements at random, after the latest after the 10th one, you start feeling good about yourself because you have reminded yourself of the things you have done. Good. Let's look at some of the milestones in my life, because I know I've already overwhelmed you with all the stories and pictures. So I started out as a registered nurse, which in Germany is a diploma course. And then by the time I finished nurses training, I already knew I was coming to Africa. I was still working on the details, but I knew that's where I was going. So I purposely joined the orthopedic A&E unit of the hospital where I trained in, just so that I have to deal with all the emergencies and the unexpected things and learn how to react in such situations. And let me tell you, it's totally different than what they show you in the movies. There is no shouting and screaming. It's just people doing their work. And then I went for mission training. I did that in North Carolina in the mountains. We lived right next to a Cherokee reservation. So we also had already a lot of cultural exposure. I went to a Cherokee church and learned how to deal with people that come from a totally different culture and a totally different way of thinking. And that was really helpful, because later when I came to Kenya, I kept remembering that there is other ways of doing things. And then when I finished the mission training, I went back to Germany to also raise funds now for my mission work and to gain more experience. So I joined the aseptic surgical ward in a trauma hospital and worked there for almost a year. And then I did some training in tropical medicine and ended up coming to Kenya 29 years ago. And first I worked as a nurse in mission services. Again, things didn't go so smooth, because just by coincidence, when I had landed in Kenya, the nursing council changed the rules. So instead of the expected maybe 3-4 weeks of attachments and then an oral exam, and then you get your nursing license, I ended up with 6 months of attachments. And first the doctor thought I had failed the oral exam, until somebody else also explained to him that the system had changed. So here I was, ready to go and work in northern Kenya, and I was stuck in Nairobi, having to work in the Nairobi City Council, in the Kenyatta Hospital, which those days was cockroach city. I've never seen so many cockroaches in one place. So you can imagine that was also not easy. But the 6 months were also very good, because I learned to understand the Kenyan or African health systems, which are totally different than the German ones. And I learned to do things that in Germany used to be done by doctors, not by the nurses. And of course, you continue rolling with the punches. And then I ended up going to the village where I was recruited for almost a year after I had reached Kenya. Then, of course, I didn't stay there too long because of all the disagreements I had with them. And I ended up working for the first HMO. In the first HMO, I was a clinic nurse and an air rescue nurse. That was not as dramatic as air rescues are in other places, because it was more evacuations. So you'd go and collect patients that have been stabilized in some hospital, but they need specialized care. And so we had to bring them to Nairobi. It was actually really fun, because flying in Kenya or in Africa in general is just amazing. When you're flying over those amazing landscapes And as you're flying to pick the patient, you have nothing to do. And when you're coming back, if you're lucky, your patient is very stabilized. So you're just having a nice chat with them and keep on checking on them. Of course, it's not always that way. And then later, I actually didn't put that there. I became a care manager for the same HMO. So I ended up going to all the hospitals around Nairobi. And in the end, I was the clinic manager in Lokichogyo. That is the base camp for the UN. After that, thanks to my ex-husband, I lost my job with that HMO. But about half a year later, I joined another HMO through my running friends. One evening, I needed a lift home. That's where networking comes in. And somebody gave me a lift and he asked me if I know Avenue Healthcare. And I said, yes, I've heard about it. And then he told me that his wife works there. What he didn't tell me is that he owns it. And that's how I ended up working there as medical quality manager. And with them, we also did all kinds of fun things, but I also learned a lot about how to do statistics, how to write reports. And I already started doing quite a number of projects without knowing that these were projects. And then I lost my job there again because we couldn't find jobs in the industry. And I ended up being a training manager in a different health organization. They had financial problems, so I left them after a while, because if your salary is paid with $50 here, $20 there, you can't really live a good life. And after being jobless for a while again, I ended up having a job as a school nurse. While I was a school nurse, I did have the time to now study, and I finally did the degree that I'd been wanting to do for a while. And that was a BBA in healthcare management. I found a program that gave you credit hours for your experience. So the whole program took me only a little bit over a year. And by the way, by the time I did my BBA, I was already in my 40s. So it wasn't easy to go back to school, but because I found the non-traditional program and it was distance learning, it worked for me. I didn't have to go and sit in classrooms with people 20 years younger than me. Then when I left the job as a school nurse, I became a clinic manager, and I thought, a clinic administrator, and I thought that was the kind of work I was going to do for the rest of my career. But again, another trauma happened, and we couldn't work together with my boss. It was a new clinic that was being built up, and he had lied to me. The money that he said he had for building up the clinic, he was actually waiting for it. He was waiting for payments from the government, and governments in third world countries are never the fastest payers. So he didn't have money to run a clinic, and we were trying to build up a clinic with no money. And when I left them, a friend had offered me a job in that company that was providing the link between the health insurer and the healthcare provider. So I became a business process coordinator with them and found myself in the IT world. But because it was still medical, I enjoyed doing what I was doing. But then, as I said, the company had to shut down. And I ended up in the IT company that was now doing IT only, nothing to do with NGO or healthcare work or anything. And I was doing, well, it was called customer relations. And I was solving all the clients' problems. Any client that had a bigger problem ended up on my desk. And then, as I said, I was forced into project management. Now, the way I was forced into project management, I wasn't very happy about it. So I started working on an exit strategy, but I didn't want to leave them in a fix either. So when I had built up the project management office and had trained at least 2 of the project managers to the level that we needed, I left and joined another company to become head of projects. Again, I found myself in the IT world. This time I was working in a company that was doing security system installations. So we were now installing CCTV cameras or any kind of security systems that you can have in your house or your office. But as head of projects, I was doing more of the setting up of processes and developing templates and all kinds of other things. And then we actually realized we developed a gating system where a project has to go through certain stage gates to be allowed to continue, so that we would be able to avoid projects being finished without them being finished, where clients are signed off and yet the project isn't really finished. And that's where I built up the project compliance unit, because if you have a gating system, then you need a compliance unit. This company also at some point decided that it's time for me to become a consultant, even so they knew I didn't have the right immigration papers to do that. So they simply didn't renew my work permit. And I ended up freelancing for a while. I got a work permit through a friend of mine in his company, and I ended up being a project management trainer. Again, that was something I never wanted to be, but I enjoyed my classes that I did, and I'm still in contact with some of my students. And I became their lead project manager. And then just before COVID, I was very, very fortunate to be employed while other people were losing their jobs. So I became a program manager and process specialist. And I worked with a construction company now. In this construction company, I was responsible for the internal strategy projects. So again, a new field, a new area to work in, but I also knew it would give me skills that I will later need as a consultant. And end of last year, I finally got my permanent residence. So now I can do any job I want to, and I don't need work permits anymore. And that's when I said, now it's time to jump. And I left employment and went on my own. And now I do all kinds of things apart from managing client projects. I'm also a writer. I'm still trying to see how to monetize that. I'm a speaker, and I'm slowly starting to get speaking engagements where I'm actually paid. And of course, I do enjoy giving those ones that I'm giving for free, because you're always giving back and you're learning always from the questions people ask. And then I'm also working on becoming a coach. And I have already a lot of people I've been mentoring for years, but because I, on the one hand, wanted to give back, and on the other hand, I wasn't allowed to earn money with anything outside of my employment. I'd been doing it for free. And now I'm finally in that position where I can start charging. And I have started getting my first mentorship clients that actually pay me for my mentorship. And then, of course, I do leadership training. So there you are. That's my life. And I think I've learned a lot of things that can help you also. And that's why I want to share a few more thoughts about the different, how to position yourself for a niche and create your niche. The first thing I learned is don't be a pushover. Don't allow your bosses to push you into corners. Of course, it's more difficult when you depend on that work visa or that work permit that you've been sponsored for by your employer. Then basically your employer has the upper hand. But as you're in employment, don't allow people to push you into some area that you don't want to be in. If they do, then maybe it's time to find an exit strategy. So it's important that you find a niche that you enjoy, because going to work when you absolutely hate your work is just not very productive, and your health will suffer in the long run. And once you have identified your niche, you actually need to develop your brand. How will people know that you're good in that corner? And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then as you're doing that, you will find a place where you can be yourself. And that will change over time. Like in 2018, when I first set up my company, but I couldn't run it yet because the immigration paper were delayed. I had phrased the company quite different from how the way I'm running my own company now. But because I already set up several different business streams or income streams, I was able to adjust that quite easily. So if you want to do all this, you want to develop or find your niche and then develop your brand, you need to ask yourself a few questions. The first one is, how do I become a recognized professional? How will people know that I am good in this niche of my profession? And then also you need to decide which corner of the professional sector do you want to be known for? Now, at my current stage in life, I don't want to be known as a construction project manager because I think I've done my share of running around construction projects and stumbling about on construction sites. And that's why I don't talk about it so much when I am on my social media or when I'm speaking and so on. The other thing that happened is I realized on LinkedIn, people kept finding me for the weirdest things. I kept on being found as software engineer. Now, I don't have an engineering degree, and I have never said I've studied software, but somehow I was doing something wrong. Kathy talked earlier about the keywords. In the projects, I thought it would be interesting for future employers to know the technical bits of the projects. But I wasn't in charge of the technical bits. So because I was writing the wrong things on my LinkedIn profile, people kept on finding me for funny things. And I got all kinds of inquiries whether I'd be interested in a project or in a job as a software engineer, or what was the funniest, headmistress, and all kinds of things. And that's where I had to learn the hard way that you need to really work with your keywords. And I'm not a specialist at it yet, but I know I've gotten better. And you need to learn the power of the hashtag and the power of affiliation. That's where you use your @ I used to think hashtag and @ is things that the millennials use and not us old people. But I had to learn that it's actually important to use them. And the other question you need to ask yourself is, how do I escape the corner that circumstances has forced you in? If you've been pushed into a corner that you don't want to be in, you need to find a way out if you can't embrace it. So let's look at that for a little bit. First, of course, you need a plan. So you need to plan how your career will be. Just keep in mind, your wishes for your career will change as you proceed in life. But have a plan and then read up on all the developments in your sector. Like, for example, in the project management world, in the last 3 years, things have changed completely. And project manager is not only the one anymore who makes all the plans and keeps all the documents up to date and follows everybody on their tasks, but project management has become a lot more about leadership and about business knowledge. And once you know these things, of course, you have to read up on them. And you have to take little courses that help you and give you the skills that you need. Now, finding your niche, it was difficult for me to do that in general. That's why I'm talking from the perspective of a project manager. But I think that can also give you ideas how you can do research in your specific profession. What kind of paths can be there? So, for example, if you're a project manager, you can just be a normal employed project manager. But you can also be a part-time project manager, which means you have a normal job as well. And part of your hours goes to project management, part of hours to your normal profession. You could be a small works project manager. That means you have probably between 6 and 10 projects you're running in parallel, but they're all short projects and they don't need too much of your time. Then you can be a major works project manager. Those are the projects that will take you months, if not years, to finish. Very often, even you can be employed for one specific project to run with it. Then you can also be an internal change project manager, because companies are constantly changing. There is the new IT developments. There is other requirements that companies have to introduce and deal with. So there is constantly internal change. And there are specific courses you can do for that if you want to position yourself for that. Of course, you can also just in quotes, proceed and become a senior project manager and maybe run the project management office. That would be the normal career progression as most people see it within project management. But as you can see already with the things I mentioned, there are certain niches you can position yourself in where you can also proceed. Or you can become a program or portfolio manager. And then, of course, you can become an independent project manager who's freelancing, who takes up contracts. Or you can become a consultant. And a very important corner of any profession is being a trainer or mentor or coach. Because the young people that are coming, they need somebody to help them into their shoes, or the people who are changing careers midway. Good. Now let's look a little bit more on project management consultant. You can either be an internal or an external consultant or just independent. In my last employment, where I was program manager and process specialist, I was actually an internal consultant, which means they employed me for my knowledge to teach the company and help them develop their things. And for them, of course, it was cheaper than hiring a bigger consulting company. Then, of course, there are always special niches, like within project management. You can specialize in any of the things a project manager does, whether you want to be a scheduler or you want to be a risk analyst or a contract specialist or a PMO setup specialist. The list is actually endless. I just picked 4 of them. And if you want to specialize in any of those areas, then you need to figure out how you can do that and look for courses that push you in the right direction. You can also, as a consultant, be brought in to be just an advisor to the senior management, which means you don't get involved in the day-to-day running of the company. You just look at it from an outside perspective and then advise the senior management. Of course, you can also consult as a program or portfolio specialist, or as a specialist who sets up project compliance offices. And if you have a bigger company, you can also be somebody who provides resources. So you can build up a team of people that then can be outsourced to clients. So for example, you can have your scheduling specialist, or you can have your risk analysis specialist, or your contract specialist that is on your payroll and you hire them out to clients. So these are just some of the things that you can do as a consultant. I hope that already gives you some ideas for your specific career path that you have. Now, when you're looking for your niche, please don't just go for the one with the most money. Kathy, you actually mentioned it earlier also, that sometimes people spend a lot of money on training in an area that's not suitable for them. And I actually have a colleague. She was a Microsoft engineer and became a project manager. She was excellent in her job in the software industry, both as an engineer and as a project manager. But she had her eyes set on bigger things. She wanted to be in mega construction. So she actually managed to get a scholarship and did some training in mega construction management with some certificate. And later she came and joined me in the company where I was working, and was now suddenly handling construction projects where we were subcontractors who were doing the security installations. And she was okay with the smaller ones, or with the ones where we're just dealing with the client and it's not really a construction, it's just an installation. But very soon it turned out that she really had a hard time with the atmosphere on construction projects. Construction sites are a man's world. Doesn't matter how many women are there. And in our environment, the majority of the people is still men, and it's a rough environment. The language used is not exactly polite. And there is still a lot of blame game, and shouting and screaming at people. And she found that she couldn't handle it. So she actually resigned from being a project manager and went to stay at home and started baking cakes. But then we sat down with her also and talked with her, and she realized it's just that niche of construction project management that is not hers. Since then, she has become an independent project manager, and she's been doing projects again in the software world, which is her home, and she's happy there. So that was for her an excursion. That was a learning process that she felt like she could have done without that. So look, as you're looking for a niche, look for a niche that you're comfortable in, one that fits you. Of course, there is women that don't have a problem with that rough atmosphere in a construction site. I don't specifically like it, but I could take it easier because of the environments I had worked in before. And one of the reasons I don't want to be known as a construction project manager is because I also don't want to constantly go into that atmosphere. So you need to find a place that fits you and that you're happy in. Then, of course, I think you've seen that from my life. You realize that your niche may not be your permanent place. It's the right place for you now, but you have to keep assessing. Your preferences will definitely change with age because you don't have that energy anymore. There are certain things you don't want to deal with it anymore. Plus, of course, you have to prepare yourself for the time when you reach the so-called retirement age. And of course, your priorities change. And then again, markets change. I mean, when is the last time you have seen a traditional secretary in a modern company? That was a very safe profession in the 70s and 80s. If you were a secretary, you were somebody. You always found a job. Nowadays, unless you have reinvented yourself, you will not find a job. And as I said, you have to think of your retirement. As you age, people don't want to employ you because you may be too expensive, because you've reached a certain level. But also, people want to have young and active people. So they want to employ the 35-year-old that has 40 years of job experience. So, of course, once you're in your 50s like I am, it is difficult to find jobs. And you need to think of a plan B. But don't wait until you reach your 50s. You need to start preparing for it. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And with all that, of course, as Kathy said, you shouldn't be alone. You need a mentor. All of us need one. Even those of us who are mentoring others, we still need a mentor. And then you need to build your brand. Of course, building your brand is that precarious balancing act, because you want to avoid being seen as this professional and obnoxious specialist who is a geek. You want to be seen as the professional in that corner where you want to be. So you really have to think about what you need to do. Excuse me. The first thing is, of course, good work speaks for itself. Remember what Kathy said earlier about how you put things in your CV? That you talk about your special achievements? Don't talk about the ones so much that don't have anything with the niche where you want to go to. Stress on the ones that have to do with your niche. But of course, your attitude also speaks for itself. And then you need to prove yourself. And there's many ways of doing that. While you're in employment, tackle any issue that's thrown at you head on. Be self-driven and show yourself to be reliable. Somebody who thinks by yourself. So like if there's an issue, by the time you talk to your superior, have a solution in your mind. That may not be the one that your superior wants to use afterwards, but at least it proves to your boss that you know something, that you have a solution. And people will always remember you for that. And that has two effects. Like even somebody where you've worked, but you've left that employment, they may recommend you to someone else later. who needs somebody who does exactly what you prove to them you can do. And then, of course, make use of your LinkedIn profile. I talk about that in a little bit. That is actually a very powerful tool, but only if you use it. It's kind of like if you have a hammer in your house, the hammer will only help you when you get it out of that toolbox and start using it. If it's in that toolbox, it doesn't help you a whole lot. And when you're working on your profile or your CV, make sure you choose those milestone projects, those milestone achievements wisely, so that they reflect the niche that you want to be seen in. And then if you're a project manager, also put a value to the projects that you have managed. I didn't understand that for a very long time because I was doing security projects, and installing a walk-through metal detector was costing you about 3 times as much as doing 200 data points in a new office. But the 200 data points would take you a month or 2, depending on the kind of site you're working on. While the walk-through metal detector that costs 3 times as much took you 1 day. But it actually has something to do with, it's proof for how much money or how much value your employer trusts you with. So like if you have done that $1 million project, doesn't matter how long it took, it means your employer trusted you with that kind of money. Now, one of the other things that you need to do is start talking about your knowledge and show the passion in your profession. Remember, I said when I started working in the IT world, I found myself speaking, which I never thought I would do. First, it was unconsciously, and it was just things that were thrown at me. But later I realized the more you speak, the more you talk about things, even during networking events, the more it will become known that you have knowledge in that area. And as I said earlier, discover the power of the hashtag and the @ So like, for example, if you go onto my LinkedIn profile, you will see that I have about 4 or 5 favorite hashtags. And they're exactly what I want to be known for. They're about leadership, servant leadership, project management, program management, and such things. But I will not have a hashtag about construction management. Good. So there's some more things you can do to build your brand. Find a mentor, somebody you admire. And actually, a lot of people will be very willing to mentor you if you approach them. Because if someone comes to you and says, can you mentor me? It makes you feel good. And I've actually approached quite a few people in my life to mentor me, and I've had people offering to mentor me, and I have really benefited every single time. Then start writing on your professional website, or on your professional body's website, or on LinkedIn. You can publish articles on LinkedIn. That's why I actually published my first articles. And then I discovered projectmanagement.com. And I've been contributing there for the last 4 years or 5 years. Now I'm one of their preferred writers. So they actually tell me about the topic of the month, which other people don't hear about. And that's how my articles will now end up on the front page. Then you can volunteer to speak. If you speak in a small circle within your professional environment, that will help. And people will learn that you know something. You will also develop your speaking skills and your fear of speaking in front of people. And the higher you climb in your career, the more you will have to speak in front of people. And then again, as you choose topics, choose the topic from the niche you want to be known for. Like, I will probably refuse to speak about risk management. It's not my favorite topic. It's something I do, yes, but it's not something I really enjoy talking about. But you will find me talking about leadership. You will find me talking about project management in general, or your project management career. And here's a very interesting lady. She's called Dory Clark. And she is a renowned author, business thinker, and communication coach. And I have learned a lot from her newsletters and from her books. So in the year 2020, she wrote in her newsletter under the title, How to Become a Sought After Expert, about a lot of the things that both Kathy and I have already mentioned. And you can use that very much for your LinkedIn profile. First of all, you need to create content so that you appear higher in the search. You don't appear on page 4,354, because then nobody will ever find you. But the more you're active, the higher you go in the ranks. So for example, simple ways are either you put down your opinion, you can write a whole article, but you can start small. Forward something, you find some article that you find really interesting, forward it, and then put a short comment and a hashtag. And with that, you have already catapulted yourself much higher. And if you put an @ now, then a miracle will happen, because whenever you post, only the people who know you can see you. But if you put @ then everybody who reads and follows that person or that company can see what you've written. And if you want to get a job at a certain company, let's say I'm trying to get a job at Coca-Cola, then in any content that I put on LinkedIn, I will put in the comments something about @ Coca-Cola. And that way, when their recruiters look for my LinkedIn profile, they'll find me much easier. Then, of course, you need to develop your social proof. That's the keywords that Kathy already mentioned. You can do your articles, your comments. You can affiliate yourself. Like for myself, one of the hashtags and the ads that I also use a lot is the Project Management Institute, because I want to be affiliated with this. And as mentioned many times, the power of hashtag and ad. And then you also need to build your network. Now here in Kenya, it's very common that somebody goes to a networking event and comes and shakes your hands and says, "Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm looking for a job." Now that's not networking, that's putting people off. Because if someone comes to you like that on a networking event, that other person will take a step backwards. Again, Dory Clark has a very interesting book that she published last year, which is called The Long Game. And she talks in detail about how to network. And her tip is actually, as you're networking with people, you're building the relationship. And the relationship is not so much about the professional things. It's about you and the other person. So you need to find something that connects you, whether it is the connection that you share a love for baking cakes or a love for climbing mountains, or you support the same football team. Once you build this personal connection and this relationship, now you can start introducing professional things. So her tip is actually that as you're building your network, in the first 1 year of knowing a new person, you don't talk about doing business together. And that really is a long game. When I read that, it really took me aback. But then she explains it very detailed. Now, here's also a few skills that we really need to work on. First one is the relationship intelligence, the emotional intelligence. Yeah, the two of them are slightly different, but to me, relationship intelligence is a step higher than emotional intelligence. You need to understand the other person, where they're at. Even when you're leading a team, what's happening in your team member's life? Why is this one not performing today? Instead of telling him or shouting at him, why aren't you performing? Sit down with them, have a cup of tea, and find out what's going on in their lives. Then you need people skills. Of course, you need to have a mentoring and coaching mentality. Don't keep that knowledge to yourself, share it. And forget about the old top-down approach, get agile, where you all become team members and you're working together on something. If you want to be the boss who tells everybody what to do, you're not going to last very long in the current world. A very, very important skill is conflict resolution. There's even a book that I've read that's called Have a Good Conflict. which actually means when there's a conflict in your team or in your work, see it as an opportunity. So for example, in a project, if I have two engineers fighting about what is the right approach, I try to sit them down and let them discuss it reasonably. Because probably they both have a point. Now, if I'm the one who wants to do top down, I'll tell them, okay, we're doing this. But you're missing an opportunity here. You're having these two people who are experts and who are having different opinions and different approaches. Let them discuss it and then let them agree on what is the best approach. And you will find they find solutions that you never thought possible. And a very important thing you need to work on is, or read up on, is servant leadership. Servant leadership is not about doing things for other people, but it is about bringing out the best in your team members and helping them to shine. Good, I can see I'm running out of time. Keep reviewing your career, yeah? Keep asking yourself, if you found your niche, is it still the right niche? Or maybe 2-3 years down the time line or so, it's time to move on. Then look at yourself. Are you enjoying your job? Are you enjoying where you are? Or are you longing for change? And I'm not saying just leave the job, but start planning how you position yourself where you want to be in future. Having the right job is also about being happy. Where do you want to be? And the other thing is, like when I was working as a school nurse, I told you I had the time to do my degree on the side. That tells you something. I wasn't challenged enough. It was an easy job for me. Yes, it paid my bills and it was good for me at that time, but it wasn't somewhere where I would be for a long time. So I had to work on getting out of it and moving forward. So basically it's a cycle. You review your career, then you educate yourself on what's happening in your career field. And then you start positioning yourself and start networking purposely with people that are in that niche that you want to get into. So there's a few things to remember. One is building your brand and your name is a lifelong ongoing process. So you don't design that CV once and use it for the rest of your life, but you have to keep changing it, and your brand also. Like a few years ago, I was happy to be known as the project manager who goes on construction sites, but now I'm not. So I had to rebrand. And you need to keep reflecting on where you're at and where you want to be. So take time off. And when you do that and you do it successfully, then you will find fulfillment. Good. Last 2 slides, I think. Just a few possibilities for later stages in life. The dilemma is we become unemployable at some point. So we have to have something else that gives you money. In Kenya, retirement age is 60, which means I'm almost there. Nobody will employ me in a few years from now. The German pensions that we always hear so much about, they don't exist anymore. People still have some kind of a pension for the rest of their life, but not enough to live on. So that is a fact. So we just need to keep rethinking things. You can't save enough for retirement. We have to keep earning money. As we age, our medical bills will go up and our abilities will go down. These are just facts. And that's why many people recommend, and that's why I've also been working on that, is build several streams of income and build streams that you can continue even in the long run, yeah? Which you can even continue when you maybe are not so physically able to move around anymore. One of the ways of creating some income is sharing knowledge. But you need to create your name there first. So you start speaking for free, and then slowly, you'll start getting offers where you can speak. You can be a mentor, you can be a coach. Remember, I said as a mentor, I've mentored for years, and this year is when I finally started charging for it. And of course, not everybody. You look at each case individually. You can do trainings. You can write and speak. And these things are not just what creates your brand, but it can also become a stream of income. This writing and speaking is one thing I'm still working on. You can actually go on contracts when you're not employable anymore. A company may be needing your knowledge and they'd be happy to give you a 6-month or 1-year contract while they don't want to employ you or their policies don't allow them to employ you. But whatever you do, you need to be creative and find new ideas. Keep learning. Doesn't matter how old we are, we can keep learning. And keep looking at that next niche. Facts are, we all need to diversify. And we all need to slow down as we age, because our bodies may let us down. But if we find these things that we can maintain and enjoy doing in old age, we can find a very fulfilled life. And fulfillment is really important. We all know change, complete change may be necessary. I think you've seen that in my life's journey. I've had complete change a couple of times. And if somebody would have told my 18-year-old myself that I will end up in the IT world, I would have just laughed at you.
Mhm.
If anybody would have told me I'd be speaking and teaching, I would have laughed at you. It was things that I never thought I'd do. But the good news is, it's possible.